See, I grew up in a predominantly Irish and Italian community. And my father was a bartender at the Irish American. And that's why I first learned to like dialects, because he had friends from Ireland, and I get to listen to them, and they tell me all wonderful stories about growing up in Ireland. It was quite fascinating. But you know what? Honesty is part of their culture. And they said, you're a good boy, but you're a fat little kid. I don't want to frighten you, but if you're too fat, the angels won't be able to carry you to heaven. Actually, my dad's friends from Ireland gave me the best diet advice I ever had. I'm going to give you a diet. It's going to work for you your whole life. And it is, because I've been up and I've been down, and I feel pretty good now. And see,
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Wasden Wednesday, October the 4th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have betrayal, rules for patriots, rules for retrogrades, no free lunch, bishop-barron, matt-gaetz, and SEAL Team 6. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
The person who profits from this law will complain bitterly, defending his acquired rights. He will claim that the state is obligated to protect and encourage his particular industry, that this procedure enriches the state because the protected industry is thus able to spend more and to pay higher wages to the poor working men. Do not listen to this sophistry by vested interests. The acceptance of these arguments will build legal plunder into a whole system. In fact, this has already occurred. The present-day delusion is an attempt to enrich everyone at the expense of everyone else, to make plunder universal under the pretense of organizing it. Friedrich Bastiat. I can only say that the prophetic nature of what Bastiat writes here is borderline creepy. That 21st century defenses of cronyism, borrowing from the 19th century pleadings of rent seekers, which Bastiat warned us against over 150 years ago, says much about the immutability of human nature and the gravity of what is at stake here.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades, 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 28. For radicals, the issue is never the real issue. Don't be fooled. Whatever it happens to be, radicals' talking point du jour is invariably a mere ruse aimed at achieving a darker, more nefarious, more strategic, long-term goal. Mod cons often make the mistake of engaging radicals on the substance of their talking points, as if radicals are advocating for or against a given policy in good faith. But this is folly. The talking points of radicals, their issues of the day, are always mere Trojan horses for accomplishing a deeper agenda. When radicals take up the mantle of a given issue, it's as an avenue for pursuing something far more profound. So, you'll never be able to get a hardened radical to abandon his endorsement of, let's say, expansive firearms restrictions, even if you offer irrefutable proof that crime rates are lower and murders are fewer in areas where legal gun carriage proliferates. The issue for the radical was never truly an intolerable level of violent crimes. That was all a decoy, a convenient setting for emotive lip service aimed at providing the justification for a reimagined society. Mod cons would be well served to understand, for example, that the debate over gun control isn't about reducing deaths. It's about making people more dependent on government by depriving them of self-sufficiency. Likewise, the debate over abortion isn't about a woman's right to choose. It's about freeing women from the home by enabling women's careerism. The debate over unfettered immigration isn't about relieving the world's poor, tired, huddled masses. It's about ushering in globalism and undermining the sovereignty of the nation-state. The debate over raising taxes isn't really about balancing the budget. It's about income redistribution. The debate over climate change isn't really about protecting the environment. It's about handicapping the economies of first world nations so that third world nations can achieve parity of wealth. The debate over gay marriage isn't about equality of rights. It's about debasing and undermining matrimony and the family, which are viewed as patriarchal and oppressive. The debate about trans rights isn't about respecting human dignity. It's about undermining the moral order and crushing sexual taboos. The true believers, those wonks who become embroiled on the radical side of the foregoing fights, fail to comprehend that they are mere pawns in a larger game that is being played by cleverer people. If you don't know whether or not you're a pawn, then you're a pawn. On a meta level, what radicals are really pursuing is a humanist utopia, a world without borders, class distinction, sex distinction, and wealth inequality, a world where each man is free to live out his unique artistic identity, doing as he pleases, unshackled from arbitrary constraints placed upon him by a domineering ruling class. It's a subjectivist, existentialist vision wherein each man can make of himself what he wills, serving not God, but his own whims, and thereby ostensibly the community. Till this ultimate stage of the radical vision is achieved, the state must be grown and empowered so that it can be used as a bludgeon to implement the unnatural policies that will ensure the attainment of the longed-for utopia. But out of fear of backlash, radicals have to scheme to bring about their new order in secret. They can't broadcast what they plan to do because it would prove fatally unpopular. So they have to implement their grand vision piecemeal, never tipping their hand till all becomes clear in one phonic denouement. Be reminded that the radical vision is an inherently godless vision, one that must be heartily rebuffed by the retrograde. Efficient causes, creators, imbue their creations with final cause, with purpose. Since God is our creator, we cannot choose our own purposes in life. To decide man's purpose is God's unique privilege, and he has decreed, once and for all, that our purpose is to know, love, and serve him. Living life outside of these parameters leads only to misery and ruination. That said, we need to attack the radical vision in its unmasked form. There is no use debating an endless litany of decoy issues with radicals, except to temporarily stave off an attack. Rather, we need to attack the philosophical errors that are at the core of radicals' doctrine. Becoming bogged down in the morass of policy minutiae with radicals is a fool's errand, since their mania for the utopian state moves them to ignore the illogic of the many planks of their platform, just as the tail wags the dog.
And that was Rule 28 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
Chapter 4, Commandment 3, Never accept the premise of your opponent's argument. Premise is a word many Americans are not familiar with, and neither do they use it in their everyday speech. However, the premise is one of the most powerful weapons in political warfare. Master the art of the premise, and you will master your opponent. A premise is the assumption of an argument that is meant to justify the conclusion the one making the argument is hoping you'll come to. If one fails to establish the premise of his argument, one almost always fails to convince others of his conclusion. On the other hand, if one establishes a premise, one will more than likely get others to agree with his conclusion. For example, if the premise of the argument is over reproductive choice and not the sanctity of human life, then the conclusion will come down on the side of the premise accepted. If there's one thing the Republicrats are good at, it's accepting the left's premise on virtually everything. As a result, for too long we have argued with the left over the conclusion, e.g., big government versus small government, when we should be arguing over the premise, e.g., what's legal for the government to do versus what's illegal for the government to do. Thankfully, there were plenty of grassroots conservatives who have read the Constitution that could invade many of the town halls held by the ruling class in the summer of 2009 and attack their flawed premise. These town halls became a treasure trove of sound bites for talk show hosts like me, with the ruling class caught on tape saying all kinds of stupid and anti-constitutional things. This set the stage for the midterm uprising of 2010, when several Republicrats were defeated in primaries, and more than 700 Democrats nationwide were fired by the American people at the polls. This was all done in spite of the leadership of the Republican Party, not because of it. We had to drag the GOP leadership kicking and screaming across the finish line. While we were basing our arguments against Obamacare on the law of the land, the Republican Party establishment was relying on shallow talking points like, we can't afford it. It's tough to argue we can't afford it when the other side is arguing on behalf of every contrived class of victims in the culture. If you were a politician, would you rather be identified with Robin Hood or Ebenezer Scrooge? On the other hand, if you argue the legality of legislation rather than its supposed good intentions, the entire argument is reframed in your favor. Because if the basis for government action in our system is simply good intentions, then what can't the government do? Moreover, what or who determines which and whose intentions are good? Every despot and dictator believes his intentions are good, and alternative definitions for good intentions have led to some of the wickedest government in history. Our founding fathers knew this, so they accomplished a first in the history of mankind, a constitution that binds the jurisdiction and conscience of the state rather than the individual. Prior to our Constitution, governments issued legal documents to clearly define the rights of citizens and operated under the premise that all rights and privileges came from government. Our Constitution begins with the premise that our rights come from God and that government's only role is to secure and protect those God-given rights. For example, since God grants all people the right to call on Him, whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved, when their hearts are convicted to do so, our government has an obligation to protect your religious freedom. Another example might be, since God grants us the right to self-defense, our government has an obligation to protect and enforce the Second Amendment. The Constitution is a plainly worded, objective moral standard of self-governance. It is no more a living, breathing document than is the Bible, and it's no coincidence the same people who believe the Bible is open to their subjective whims believe the same of the Constitution. Once someone defies God's authority, defying man's authority becomes no big deal. We are not predicated on the rule of victims, but the rule of law. Our founders loathed the term democracy for a reason, because it has a penchant to devolve into mob rule. This is why they established a republic, where our elected officials are not our rulers or leaders, but rather our representatives and employees. Since their opportunity to govern comes only from the consent of the governed, we are in essence utilizing them as our proxies. And the power we have afforded them, we can take back and give to someone else if they're not doing the job we want them to do. Our founders read in the Bible where it says, "Do not pervert justice, do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly." We're not to be intimidated by someone of great wealth and influence, nor are we to be emotionally manipulated by the downtrodden. What we are to do is perpetuate a government where there is no caste system, but rather everyone is held accountable to the same standard, no matter their station in life, and everyone has an equal opportunity to pursue happiness. Another group of people once rose to power, promising their own government-imposed definition of fairness. They were called Bolsheviks. In America, we promise the freedom to exploit your God-given talent to its fullest potential, and you face the consequences for failure or reap the rewards for success. Now, which system would you rather defend? Let's take a look at several key economic questions facing the country right now for examples of not accepting the left's premise. I was once asked by a website to join an esteemed list of contributors, most of whom are smarter and more well-known than me, in an ongoing conversation about some of the hot-button economic issues facing the country. With folks representing the Cato Institute, Club for Growth, Stanford University, as well as names like Dinesh D'Souza, Grover Norquist, Star Parker, and James Taranto, having already answered the site's questions, I was wondering what it is I could possibly contribute to the conversation that hadn't already been said. That's when it dawned on me that often debates about the future of the country immediately jump to the conclusion of our worldview when we should be arguing the premise. For example, we argue for limited government when the real argument is why someone is for small government or big government. Drawing this distinction is more important than ever before, because there is a debate within conservative circles about whether limited government and freedom can occur in a vacuum apart from addressing the moral issues or the condition of the culture. And the answer to that question is absolutely not. You cannot have limited/self-government without first having a moral people capable of governing themselves. And you cannot have a moral people without the sort of spiritual awakening in a culture that preceded this republic in the first place. It's no coincidence the more we collectively turn our backs on our spiritual heritage, the more immoral the culture becomes, and thus the bigger the government gets. For if men will not be ruled by God, they must be ruled by other men. Otherwise, there's no higher authority we can call upon to settle our disputes and disagreements with one another. The more we need the rule of man, the bigger the government gets. The more we submit to the rule of God, the smaller the government gets. With this in mind, I decided to answer their questions from a worldview standpoint rather than attempt to discuss tactical economics with those who know a lot more about it than I do. If we cannot challenge the premise of the left's belief system, we cannot deconstruct it. And if we can't deconstruct it, we certainly will not be able to defeat it. Currently, we are not challenging the left's premise. We are venting about the conclusion/application of their premise. Read the questions and then my answers to get an idea of what it means to never accept the premise of your opponent's argument. First question: what causes an economy to prosper? Answer: the most prosperous economies are those that truly understand the role of government. As it is stated in our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, there is a God. Our rights come from him, and the only purpose of government is to secure and defend those God-given rights. To put it another way, government is to encourage, not do good, and punish evil. Of course, government in and of itself is not a moral agent, and usually inflicts the most horrors on humanity when it attempts to be. So it needs another institution to define for it what is good and what is evil. That is the role of the church and the family. These clearly defined spheres of jurisdiction between cultural institutions are what produce the proper balance of liberty and morality, thus allowing for the most prosperity. Next question: what role should government play in an economy? Answer: the biggest misconception is that we're having a debate about the role of government in America today. when we're really having a debate about what authority or moral ethic are we going to govern ourselves by. The answer to that question then determines the role of government. For example, cultures that abandon the Judeo-Christian moral ethic, as ours is currently doing, end up growing government because something must fill the God-shaped void.
And that was Chapter 4 of Rules for, well, at least part of Chapter 4 for Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
So for a lot of people, maybe listening to me right now, you say, yeah, at one point in my life, I was really excited about religious things. And I was excited about the Lord. But then I didn't cultivate it. And then what does the Lord say here? Some tribulation or persecution comes. Well, yeah, it always happens, doesn't it? Some difficulty, tribulation, someone attacks me, someone makes fun of me. You got to cultivate the seed, everybody, day in and day out, season in and season out, when it's fun to do so, when it's not fun to do so. Otherwise, it'll fade away.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. So, one of the things that you're going to hear about is chaos. You probably go to work and your Democrat or liberal coworkers are going to give you this chaos, and the chaos is on the side of the Democrats, not the Republicans. Or another way you can say it is just because they call it chaos doesn't mean it's so. And you can say, I don't know what you're talking about. What chaos? The other thing is that there's a lot of talk about how Republicans, had betrayed. There was Newt Gingrich said 8 Republicans betrayed the party by voting to oust Speaker McCarthy. No, the betrayal was on the part of the Democrats. When Speaker McCarthy went ahead and did a continuing resolution on September 30th to keep the government funded for 45 more days, 209 Democrats voted for it. When Speaker McCarthy was up, he was in the process of being vacated, his office being vacated, not one Democrat voted for him. So the betrayal is on the part of the Democrats. The problem is on the part of the Democrats, as always. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, some Matt-Gaetz.
And when it comes to how those raise money, I take no lecture on asking patriotic Americans to weigh in and contribute to this fight from those who would grovel and bend knee for the lobbyists and special interests who own our leadership, who have, boo all you want, who have hollowed out this town and have borrowed against the future of our future generations. I'll be happy to fund my political operation through the work of hardworking Americans, $10 and $20 and $30 at a time, and you all keep showing up at the lobbyist fundraisers and see how that goes for you.
And that was Matt-Gaetz. Back in a minute. Thank you. And again, Matt-Gaetz.
Mr. Speaker, high inflation is on the verge of bankrupting American families. Our economy is breaking in half. A typical American family can't afford to buy a house in 99% of U.S. counties. Inflation is stealing more than $700 a month from working Americans, nearly $9,000 a year. Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he has failed to take a stand where it matters. So if he won't, I will. I make no apologies for defending the right of every hardworking American to afford a decent life for themselves and their families, and we have a greater opportunity to do that and to build coalitions under new leadership. We have to rip off the Band-Aid. We have to get back on a better course. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know how this vote's going to go. Usually when a vote comes to this floor, It's pretty predetermined. And this one, I'm not so sure. But I am sure that we've made the right argument, that this place deserves single subject spending bills, that we should have 72 hours to read a bill, that something that spends more than $100 million shouldn't be put on the suspension agenda such that we can't amend it. And there shouldn't be secret side deals made on a continuing resolution to lump Ukraine in with border security. That is not right for Ukraine or border security, because it fails to give either of those issues the dignity that they would require. But we can return that dignity to this House. We can get back on a better path. We can have single subject appropriations bills. We can set a budget top line. We haven't had a budget in this place since I was in high school. So let's get a budget. Let's get our act together. Let's get on with it. Let's vacate the chair, and let's...
And that was Matt-Gaetz. Back in a minute. Thank you, and even more Matt-Gaetz.
The thing we have in common, Kevin McCarthy said something to all of us at one point or another that he didn't really mean and never intended to live up to. I don't think voting against Kevin McCarthy is chaos. I think $33 trillion in debt is chaos. I think that facing a $2.2 trillion annual deficit is chaos. I think that not passing single subject spending bills is chaos. I think the fact that we have been governed in this country since the mid-90s by continuing resolution and omnibus is chaos. And the way to liberate ourselves from that is a series of reforms to this body that I would hope would outlast Speaker McCarthy's time here, would outlast my time here, and would outlast either of our majorities. Reforms that I have heard some of the most conservative members of this body fight for, and some of the reforms that we've been battling for that I've even heard those in the Democrat caucus say would be worthy and helpful to the House, like open amendments, like understanding what the budget is. We have been out of compliance with budget laws for most of my life, most of many of your lives. And by the way, if we did those things, if we had single subject bills, if we had an understanding on the top line, if we had open amendments, if we had trust and honesty and understanding, there would be times when my conservative colleagues and I would lose, might be a few times when we'd win. There'd be times that we would form partnerships that might otherwise not be really predictable in the American body politic, but the American people would see us legislating. These last few days, we've suspended the momentum that we had established the week earlier, where we were bringing bills to the floor, voting on them, staying late at night, working hard. That's what the American people expect. It's something Speaker McCarthy hasn't delivered, and that's why I've moved to vacate the chair.
And that was Matt-Gaetz. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, one last one from Matt-Gaetz.
It is astonishing to hear any colleague give Speaker McCarthy credit for moving on to the single subject appropriations bills. As you heard my colleague, Mr. Biggs, say, that was never the plan from Speaker McCarthy. The week before we moved on to those single subject appropriations bills, the plan was another CR. He pitched a CR. They tried to get us to vote for a CR, and only when a brave few said, we are done governing by continuing resolution. We are here to eulogize the era of continuing resolution. We will not do it. We will not pass it. These bills can go. The spending may rise and fall as the years pass, but the notion that we're going to lump in the Department of Education and the Department of Labor with our military and our troops and our Border Patrol is fundamentally unserious, and I would suggest chaotic. We cannot do that. It was only because we forced that to happen. And by the way, if we continue with Speaker McCarthy, the appropriations process will go right back to what he wanted it to go back to. Just a sideshow, just a puppet show, just something to keep the hamsters on the hamster wheel as they continue to back people up against a calendar, centralize power with the lobbyists and special interests that move all kind of money through the leadership. And then that's how they get their way, and that's why the American people have been getting screwed decade after decade, and I'm not going to tolerate it anymore without a fight.
And that was Matt-Gaetz. Thank you. And now, SEAL Team 6.
This is Audible.
Blackstone Audio presents SEAL Team 6, Memoirs of an Elite Navy SEAL Sniper, by Howard E. Wasden and Stephen Templin. 10. CIA Safe House. Hunting for ID'd. Less than half a year after Casanova and I finished sniper school, we received a mission. Capture warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid and his lieutenants. Educated in Moscow and Rome, Aidid served in the Italian colonial police force before entering the military and becoming a general of the Somalian army. Aidid's clan, Habar Gadir, Ali Mahdi Mohammed's clan, Abgal, and other clans overthrew Somalia's dictator. Then the two clans fought each other for control of Somalia. 20,000 Somalis were killed or injured, and agricultural production came to a halt. Although the international community sent food, particularly the UN under Operation Restore Hope, Aidid's militia stole much of it, extorting or killing people who wouldn't cooperate, and traded the food with other countries for weapons. Starvation deaths skyrocketed to hundreds of thousands of people, and the suffering rose higher still. Although other Somali leaders tried to reach a peace agreement, Aidid would have none of it. June 5, 1993. A Pakistani force, part of the UN humanitarian team, went to investigate an arms depot at a radio station. There, Aidid's people gathered outside in protest. The Pakistani troops went in and completed their inspection. When they came out of the building, the protesters attacked, killing 24 Pakistani soldiers. Aidid's people, including women and children, celebrated by dismembering, disemboweling, and skinning the Pakistanis. Admiral Jonathan Howe, Special Representative for Somalia to the United Nations, was horrified. He put a $25,000 warrant out on Aidid for information leading to his arrest. Howe also pushed hard for JSOC assistance. August 8, 1993. Aidid's people used a command-detonated mine to kill 4 American military policemen. Enough was enough. President Bill Clinton gave JSOC the green light. The task force would include 4 of us from SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, Rangers, Task Force 160, and others. Task Force 160, nicknamed the Night Stalkers, provided the helicopter support that usually operated at night, flying fast and low to avoid radar detection. We would conduct Operation Gothic Serpent in 3 phases. First, deploy to Mogadishu and set up a base. Second, go after Aidid. And third, if we didn't succeed in apprehending Aidid, go after his lieutenants. At the team compound in Dam Neck, Virginia, Little Big Man, Sourpuss, Casanova, and I joined in getting ready to go to Somalia. Training, prepping our gear, growing beards, and letting our hair grow out. Part of prepping our gear meant going to the encryption room and coding our radios for secure voice. It was time-consuming because we had to enter a lot of codes, and they had to be the same for every handheld radio. We decided what the common frequency would be. As a sniper, I had to communicate with Casanova, my partner, and the 2 of us had to communicate with the other sniper pair, Little Big Man and Sourpuss. Then we all had to be able to communicate with our forward operating base. I made sure my E&E kit was complete and I had bribe survival cash. Then I test-fired my weapons one last time. Not knowing exactly what we'd be tasked to do, we prepared for everything. After completing our preparations, we flew down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where the Army Special Operations Command and others sit on more than 150,000 acres of hills and scattered evergreens near Fayetteville. There, we received more specific information about our mission. We brought stacked cases of food. "You won't be needing that," an Army officer told us. "We'll be bringing plenty of food." So we left the food at the Delta compound. Instructors from the Defense Language Institute taught us important phrases in Somali. Stop. Get down. Walk backward toward my voice. Hurry, etc. After a few days, we were told the op might be called off, so we flew back to Dam Neck. Then a Delta officer phoned us. "The op is on, but you won't need long hair and beards." So we got shaves and haircuts and flew back to Fort Bragg. August 27th, 1993. We boarded one of 6 C-5A Galaxy cargo planes carrying Task Force Ranger. After 18 hours in the air, we landed at Mogadishu Airfield within the UN compound south of Mogadishu. Egyptian peacekeepers guarded the outer perimeter. Inside the compound were peacekeeping forces from Italy, New Zealand, Romania, and Russia. West of the landing strip stood an old aircraft hangar where we would stay. Beyond the hangar stood a 2-story building with a lopsided roof, the Joint Operations Center, JOC. Antennas poked out of the roof like spines on a porcupine. An Army officer escorted Sourpuss, Little Big Man, Casanova, and me behind the JOC to General Garrison's personal trailer. Inside, Garrison had no visible family photos or knickknacks. At a moment's notice, he could leave without a trace. His aide had just awakened him for our arrival. Garrison took one look at the 4 of us and said, "Hey, how come you all got your hair cut? I wanted it long so you could go out in town and operate." "We were told that you wanted us to cut our hair, sir." We suspected that Delta had tried to disqualify us from the op. Go Army. Beat Navy. General Garrison gave the op to us anyway. "The 4 of you are going to be the hinge-pin of the operation," he said, then filled us in. After meeting with Garrison, we hooked up with Signals Intelligence, SIGINT, run by a CIA communications officer. Their team would gather information by intercepting signals between people, communications intelligence, and electronic signals emitted from enemy technologies such as radios, radars, surface-to-air missile systems, aircraft, ships, etc. Electronic intelligence. SIGINT deciphered encrypted information in addition to conducting traffic analysis, studying who was signaling whom and how much. They could intercept cell phones and radio communications, as well as use directional microphones to pick up conversations from great distances. Most of our SIGINT teams spoke 2 or 3 languages, and they had aircraft dedicated to their mission. Next, we went up to the CIA trailer on top of the hill and met the CIA operations officer, a black Vietnam veteran codenamed Condor. Senior to him was the deputy chief of station, an Italian-American codenamed Leopard. They answered to the thickly built, thick-mustached CIA chief of station, Garrett Jones, codenamed Crescent. In the teams, we often refer to the CIA as Christians in Action, and the CIA sometimes uses the same nickname when referring to themselves. In Somalia, the Christians in Action had their work cut out for them. It's hard to steal a government's secrets where there is no government. Before our arrival, Washington hadn't allowed the CIA to operate in town, considering it too dangerous. With us on the scene, the spooks could penetrate into downtown Mogadishu. The CIA gave us an excellent briefing about Mogadishu, including some culture and history. They also codenamed us in order of rank. Sierra 1, Sourpuss. Sierra 2, Little Big Man. Sierra 3, me. And Sierra 4, Casanova. Our safe house would be called Pasha, the title of a high-ranking person in the Ottoman Empire. Ahmed would serve as our interpreter. Behind his round-framed glasses, his eyes seldom looked directly at me when he talked. Ahmed always seemed nervous. Our main Somali operative was Mohammed. Constantly risking his life, he was always serious. After meeting with the CIA up on the hill, we returned to the hangar and requisitioned 4 AT-4s, tear gas CS grenades, flashbangs, and fragmentation grenades. Also, we requested an SST-181 beacon so aircraft flying overhead could get a fix on our area if they needed to. We had to prepare to defend the safe house in case the enemy attacked, and prepare our escape in case they overran us. That night, we stayed in the hangar with the rest of the American military, about 160 men in all. Each soldier had a 4-foot by 8-foot place to call his own. On my cot, 4 wooden poles stood up, one in each corner, to drape a net on to keep the mosquitoes out. Hawks swooped down and caught rats the size of small dogs, flying them back up to the rafters for dinner. Sections of the tin walls had space between them, allowing Mother Nature in. The hangar doors were stuck open. Beyond the doors, Helicopters sat quietly on the tarmac, filling the air with the smell of fuel. The elevation inland arose, and I could see lights and fires in Mogadishu. Behind us, an American flag hung from the rafters. I could taste the salt in the air from the ocean behind our hangar. Despite the luxurious accommodations, our four-man team wouldn't be staying long. Aidid sent 3 mortar rounds near the hangar to wish us good night. Someone wisely turned out the hangar lights. August 28, 1993. Saturday, we encrypted our PRC-112 handheld survival radios before gearing up. Outside, the tarmac simmered under our feet as we walked to our helicopter. I put on my Oakley sunglasses. The best sunglasses tone down the sun's glare and protect my eyes from debris, helping my sense of peace. They also make eye contact impossible. Sunglasses can disguise identity, be intimidating to others, project detachment, and hide emotions. Like a good friend, a good pair of sunglasses is hard to forget. Some Delta boys were on board the chopper ready to take off on a training flight. The Task Force 160 helicopter pilots, among the best in the world, told Delta, "Hey, sorry, we got a real world up. You need to let these guys on." Delta unasked the helicopter. They were not happy. "Heaven forbid we wouldn't want to stand in the way of a real world op." We boarded the chopper. Tell you about it when we get back. The 4 of us, 2 sitting in the doorway on each side with our legs dangling out, buckled our gunner's belts and the helicopter lifted off. The Delta operators became smaller and smaller as we gained altitude. The chopper flew us inland so we could look for routes and alternate routes to drive to and from our safe house. Sunshine and war had blasted much of the color out of Mogadishu. The only structures held sacred by both sides in the Civil War had been the Islamic mosques, among the few buildings standing unmolested. Many of the other major buildings had been destroyed. People lived in mud huts with tin roofs in a maze of dirt roads. Hills of broken concrete, twisted metal, and trash rose from the landscape, with charred car frames scattered about.
And that was part 1 of part 2 of SEAL Team 6 by Howard Wasden. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.